which is page 135, The Return of the Lion. At the end of our story yesterday, Lucy was absolutely sure that she saw what? Hold on, raise your hand. Sadiksha? Aslan. Did anyone believe her? Yes or no, class? No. Except for who? Raise your hand. Edmund. Brooklyn? Edmund. Thank you. He didn't really believe her, but he kind of surmised or decided that, you know what, she was right last time and we didn't believe her. I think we should just believe her this time. Okay? So today we'll see. Which way did she see Aslan? The easy way or the hard way? Luke? The harder way. You what? Oh, did you? Oh, we're going to try. We're going to get through as much as we can. We'll see. Okay? So Aslan, according to Lucy, Aslan wants them to follow him, even though it's the harder way. And the children say, you know what? We didn't see him, and we know that you're not really, I don't know. Plus, that's the hard way. This is the easy way. Let's just, you probably just didn't see the right thing. Like, let's just go this way. Okay? So, let's see what happens today. Chapter 10, The Return of the Lion. To keep along the edge of the gorge was not so easy as it had looked. Before they had gone many yards, they were confronted with young fir woods growing on the very edge. And after they had tried to go through these, stooping and pushing for about 10 minutes, they realized that in there it would take them an hour to go half a mile. So they came back and out again and decided to go around the fir wood. This took them much farther to their right than they wanted to go, far out of sight of the cliffs and out of the sound of the river, till they began to be afraid that they had lost it altogether. Nobody knew the time, but where did you go just now? Fast. Nobody knew the time, but it was getting to be the hottest part of the day. So what happened as they decided to go the easy way? Did it work out the way they wanted it to, Jacob?
No, it took them away from the path and away from the river.
Turned out to be a lot harder than they thought. When they were able at last to go back to the edge of the gorge, nearly a mile below the point from which they had started, they found the cliffs on their side of it a good deal lower and more broken. Soon they found a way down into the gorge and continued the journey at the river's edge. But first they had a rest and a long drink. No one was talking anymore about breakfast or even dinner with Caspian. Now they're just hoping they get there at all. They may have been wise to stick to the rush instead of going along the top. It kept them sure of their direction. And ever since the fir wood, they had all been afraid of being forced too far out of their course and losing themselves in the wood. It was an old and pathless forest, and you could not keep anything like a straight course in it. Patches of hopeless brambles, fallen trees, boggy places, and dense undergrowth would be always getting in your way. But the gorge of the Rush was not at all a nice place for traveling either. I mean, it was not a nice place for people in a hurry. For an afternoon's ramble ending in a picnic tea, it would have been delightful. It had everything you could ever want on an occasion of that sort. Rumbling waterfalls, silver cascades, deep amber-colored pools, mossy rocks, and deep moss on the banks in which you could sink in over your ankles, every kind of fern, jewel-like dragonflies, sometimes a hawk overhead, and once, Peter and Trumpkin both thought, an eagle. But of course, what the children and the dwarf wanted to see as soon as possible was the great river below them, and Varuna, and the way to Aslan's house. As they went on, the rush began to fall more and more steeply. Their journey became more and more of a climb and less of a walk. In places, even a dangerous climb over slippery rock with a nasty drop into dark chasms, and the river roaring angrily at the bottom. You may be sure they watched the cliffs on their left eagerly for any sign of a break, or any place where they could climb up them. But those cliffs remained cruel. It was maddening because everyone knew that if once they were out of the gorge on that side, they would have only a smooth slope and a fairly short walk to Caspian's headquarters. The boys and the dwarf were now in favor of lighting a fire and cooking their bear meat. Susan didn't want this, though. She only wanted, as she said, to get on and finish it and get out of these beastly woods. Lucy was far too tired and miserable to have any opinion about anything. But as there was no dry wood to be had, it mattered very little what anyone thought. Can they make a fire without dry wood?
No.
The boys began to wonder if raw meat was really as nasty as they'd always been told. Why are they beginning to wonder that? Brooklyn? Yeah, they are so hungry, and there's no chance of starting a fire to cook the meat. So they're like, maybe it's not as bad raw as we thought. Riley. Trumpkin assured them that it was. Of course, the children had attempted a journey like this a few days ago in England. They would have been worn out. I think I've explained before how Narnia was altering or changing them. How is Narnia changing the children? Riley? Yeah, it's like making them stronger, right? It talks about how Edmund looks more kingly since being in Narnia, and Susan remembers how to shoot her bow. They kind of, the more they're in Narnia, the more they turn into the mature adults they were when they left. Even Lucy was by now, so to speak, only 1/3 of a little girl going to boarding school for the first time, and now she was 2/3 of Queen Lucy of Narnia. Yes.
You know how you said that Susan was getting better at her bow?
Mhm.
Really, there's no way she could be bad at her bow, because all she has to do is fall back and let go in the middle, no matter what.
That's true. Oh, at last, said Susan. Oh, hooray, said Peter. The river gorge had just made a bend, and the whole view spread out beneath them. They could see open country stretching before them to the horizon, and, between it and them, the broad silver ribbon of the great river. They could see the specially broad and shallow place which had once been the fords of Varuna, but was now spanned by a long, many-arched bridge. There was a little town at the far end of it. "By Jove!" said Edmund. "We fought the Battle of Varuna just where that town is." This cheered the boys more than anything. You can't help feeling stronger when you look at a place where you won a glorious victory, not to mention a kingdom, hundreds of years ago. Peter and Edmund were soon so busy talking about the battle that they forgot their sore feet and the heavy drag of their mail shirts on their shoulders. The dwarf was interested too. They were all getting on at a quicker pace now. The going became easier. Though there were still sheer cliffs on their left, the ground was becoming lower on their right. Soon it was no longer a gorge at all, only a valley. There were no more waterfalls, and presently they were in fairly thick woods again. Then, all at once, bzzz, and a sound rather like the stroke of a woodpecker. So like a whiz and then a thunk. The children were still wondering where, ages ago, they had heard a sound just like that, and why they disliked it so, when Trumpkin shouted, "Down!"
That scared me.
I was not expecting.
At the same moment, forcing Lucy, who happened to be next to him, flat down into the bracken. Peter, who had been looking up to see if he could spot a squirrel, had seen what it was. A long, cruel arrow had sunk into a tree trunk just above his head. As he pulled Susan down and dropped himself, another came rasping over his shoulder and struck the ground at his side. "Quick! Quick! Get back! Crawl!" panted Trumpkin. They turned and wriggled along uphill, under the bracken amid clouds of horribly buzzing flies. Arrows whizzed all around them. One struck Susan's helmet with a sharp ping and glanced off. They crawled quicker. Sweat poured off of them. Then they ran, stooping nearly double. The boys held their swords in their hands for fear they would trip them up. What's happening? Matthew?
They're being attacked by King Miraz's scouts.
They're being attacked by someone.
They're being attacked by scouts in the village.
Layla, what do you think? Mm-hmm. Yep. Aiden? Bless you.
I think it was the original people.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was some of the old Marines because they were wearing armor, so they probably thought that they were wearing.
Maybe. Brooklyn? Okay.
Why did it say
So when looking at her, she looked a little bit like the little schoolgirl she was in England, but she looked more like Queen Lucy. So she was 1/3 little schoolgirl, 2/3 Queen Lucy of Narnia. That make sense? Brian?
I think it was the flies.
Think so?
Yeah, because, I mean, there's a bunch of flies. But a bunch of flies, you know how some bugs are pretty strong? How about...
So they were throwing arrows?
Pretty light.
Maybe.
Maybe the flies were carrying the arrows.
But there's arrows in it. Besides, that makes it very fun.
It was heartbreaking work. All uphill again, back over the ground they had already traveled. When they felt that they really couldn't run anymore, even to save their own lives, they all dropped down in the damp moss beside a waterfall and behind a big boulder, panting. They were surprised to see how high they had already got. They listened intently and heard no sound of pursuit. "So that's all right," said Trumpkin, drawing a deep breath. "They're not searching the wood. Only sentries, I expect. But it means that Murad has an outpost down there. Bottles and battledores, though. It was a near thing. I ought to have my head smacked for bringing us this way at all," said Peter. Okay, so now, not only was the way they chose to go harder, not only did it make them more tired, not only did it lead them to flies and moss and mud, now they're being attacked. So it really didn't work out going the easy way, right? And Peter says, "Man, I ought to be spanked for bringing us this way." "On the contrary, Your Majesty," said the dwarf. "For one thing, it wasn't you. It was your royal brother King Edmund who first suggested going by Glasswater." "Oh, I'm afraid the DLF's right," said Edmund, who had quite honestly forgotten this ever since things began to go wrong. "And for another," continued Trumpkin, "if we'd gone my way, we'd have walked straight into that new outpost, most likely. Or at least had just the same trouble avoiding it. I think this Glasswater route really has turned out for the best." "A blessing in disguise," said Susan. "Some disguise," said Edmund. "Well, I suppose we'll have to go right up the gorge again now," said Lucy. "Lou, you're a hero," said Peter. "That's the nearest you've got today to saying 'I told you so.' Let's get on." Why does he call Lucy a hero? Jacob?
Because she hasn't insulted him once.
She could have said, "I told you guys it wasn't the right way to go," but she hasn't. And as soon as we're well up into the forest," said Trumpkin, "whatever anyone says, I'm going to light a fire and cook supper. But we must get well away from here." There is no need to describe how they toiled back up the gorge. It was pretty hard work, but oddly enough, everyone felt more cheerful. They were getting their second wind. What does that mean? Second wind. What's that phrase mean? Brooklyn? Kind of. It's kind of like when you're working on something and you get really, really tired and you're like this close to quitting, but then you get a second wind and now you have a little more energy to keep going again. You know what I'm saying? So they're getting a little more energy. They're like, okay, we can do this. And the word supper had a wonderful effect. They're like, ooh, we get to eat supper when we get up there? Let's go. They reached the fir wood which had caused them so much trouble while it was still daylight, and bivouacked in a hollow just above it. It was tedious gathering the firewood. There's that word, boring, long and boring. But it was grand when the fire blazed up, and they began producing the damp and smeary parcels of bear meat, which would have been so very unattractive to anyone who had spent the day indoors. The dwarf had splendid ideas about cookery. Each apple, they still had a few of these, was wrapped up in bear's meat, as if it was to be an apple dumpling with meat instead of pastry, only much thicker, and spiked on a sharp stick and then roasted. And the juice of the apple worked all through the meat, like applesauce with roast pork. Bear that has lived too much on other animals is not very nice, but bear that has had plenty of honey and fruit is excellent. And this turned out to be that sort of bear. It was a truly glorious meal. And of course, no washing up. No one had to clean up after dinner. Only lying back and watching the smoke from Trumpkin's pipe and stretching one's tired legs and chatting. Everyone felt quite hopeful now about finding King Caspian tomorrow and defeating Miraz in a few days. It may not have been sensible of them to feel like this, but they did. All right, so Caleb, basically, remember yesterday they were going down they were at the gorge, and Lucy thought she saw Aslan and no one would believe her. Okay, and they all voted to go the opposite way of where Aslan was. So they went that way, and it turned out to be really bad. It's been really hard, they're tired, they're sore, and they got attacked by people. Like arrows shot at them. So Lucy was right. They should have gone the other way. And she could have been like, haha, I told you so. I was right. You were wrong. But she wasn't. So now they're turning around and going back Lucy's way. But first, they've stopped to cook their bear meat, have dinner, and rest. Okay? They dropped off to sleep one by one, but all pretty quickly. Lucy woke up out of the deepest sleep you can imagine, with the feeling that the voice she liked best in the whole world had been calling her name. She thought at first that it was her father's voice, but that didn't seem quite right. Then she thought it was Peter's voice, but that didn't seem to fit either. She didn't want to get up, not because she was still tired. On the contrary, she was actually wonderfully rested and all the aches had gone from her bones, but she didn't want to get up because she felt so extremely happy and comfortable. She was looking straight up at the Narnian moon, which is larger than ours, and at the starry sky, for the place where they had bivouacked was comparatively open. Lucy, came the call again, neither her father's voice nor Peter's. She sat up, trembling with excitement, but not with fear. The moon was so bright that the whole forest landscape around her was almost as clear as day, though it looked wilder. Behind her was the fir wood, away to her right the jagged cliff tops on the far side of the gorge. Straight ahead, open grass to where a glade of trees began about a bowshot away. Lucy looked very hard at the trees of that glade. "Why, I do believe they're moving," she said to herself. "They're walking about." Why is that so amazing? Matthew?
They awoke.
They awoke. The trees had been, they had kind of shrunk back into themselves for so long, ever since the Telmarines had come and attacked Narnia, right? And now they're moving again. She got up, her heart beating wildly, and walked toward them. There was certainly a noise in the glade, a noise such as trees make in a high wind, though there was no wind tonight. Yet it was not exactly an ordinary tree noise either. Lucy felt there was a tune in it, but she could not catch the tune any more than she had been able to catch the words when the trees had so nearly talked to her the night before. But there was, at least, a lilt. What's a lilt? One of our vocab words from earlier today. Manny? Like a light, happy song. She felt her own feet wanting to dance as she got nearer. And now there was no doubt that the trees were really moving in and out through one another as if in a complicated country dance. And I suppose, thought Lucy, when trees dance, it must be a very, very country dance indeed. She was almost among them now. The first tree she looked at seemed at first glance to be not a tree at all, but a huge man with a shaggy beard and great bushes of hair. But she was not frightened. She had seen such things before. But when she looked again, he was only a tree, though he was still moving. You couldn't see whether he had feet or roots, of course, because when trees move, they don't walk on the surface of the earth. They wade in it as we do water. Okay, so let's think of that for a second. When you're swimming and you're in the water and you begin walking in the bottom of the pool, are you walking on top of the water? No, you're in the water wading, right? And all the water kind of just like flows around you as you move, right? Okay, that's how the trees walk on the ground. Okay, so they're really moving underneath the ground, and just kind of all the dirt and stuff kind of just flows around them like water around us. Okay, just trying to imagine what that would be like in your head. A tree kind of just wading through the ground. Kind of weird, huh? The same thing happened with every tree she looked at. At one moment, they seemed to be the friendly, lovely giant and giantess forms which the tree people put on when some good magic has called them into full life. The next moment, they all looked like trees again. She's like, I can't tell what's going on. One minute I think they're alive, the next minute I'm not sure what to think. They look like they're still again. But when they looked like trees, it was like strangely human trees. And when they looked like people, it was like strangely branchy and leafy people. And all the time that queer, lilting, rustling, cool, merry noise. They are almost awake, but not quite, said Lucy. She knew she herself was wide awake, wider than anyone usually is. She went fearlessly in among them, dancing herself as she leaped this way and that to avoid being run into by these huge partners. But she was only half interested in them. She wanted to get beyond the trees to something else. It was from beyond them that dear voice had called her. She soon got through them, half wondering whether she had been using her arms to push branches aside, or to take hands in a great chain with big dancers who stooped to reach down to her. For they were really a ring of trees around a central open place. So look at this picture. Okay, this is kind of what's going on here. The trees are kind of moving, kind of dancing, and she's kind of walking through them. It's kind of like the other night where she woke up and it was kind of like a dream, and she's trying to figure out what in the world's going on. Let me make it fast. Same thing's happening here. Okay. She stepped out from among their shifting confusion of lovely lights and shadows. A circle of grass, smooth as a lawn, met her eyes, with dark trees dancing all around it. And then, oh joy, for he was there. The huge lion, shining white in the moonlight, with his huge black shadow underneath him. But for the movement of his tail, he might have been a stone lion, but Lucy never even thought of that. She never stopped to think whether he was a friendly lion or not. She rushed to him. She felt her heart would burst if she lost a moment. And the next thing she knew was that she was kissing him and putting her arms as far around his neck as she could and burying her face in the beautiful, rich silkiness of his mane. Aslan! Aslan! Dear Aslan! Sobbed Lucy. At last! The great beast rolled over on his side so that Lucy fell, half sitting and half lying between his front paws. He bent forward and just touched her nose with his tongue. His warm breath came all around her. She gazed up into the large, wise face. Welcome, child, he said. Aslan, said Lucy, you're bigger. That is because you are older, little one, answered he. Not because you are? I am not, but every year you grow, you will find me bigger. For a time she was so happy that she did not want to speak, but Aslan spoke. Lucy, he said, we must not lie here for long. You have work in hand, and much time has been lost today. Okay, this he's talking about when the children went the wrong way and they got all lost and turned around. Yes, wasn't it a shame? Said Lucy. I saw you all right. They wouldn't believe me. They're all so... From somewhere deep inside Aslan's body, there came the faintest suggestion of a growl. Why would he growl at her? Jacob?
Because she's yelling.
She's yelling, and she's doing what else? Layla? She's speaking poorly of her siblings, and she's blaming them. He says, and Lucy picked up on it. She was like, oh, I'm sorry, said Lucy, who understood some of his moods. I didn't mean to start slanging the others, meaning I didn't mean to start talking bad about my siblings. But it wasn't my fault anyway, was it? The lion looked straight into her eyes. Oh, Aslan, said Lucy, you don't mean that it was my fault. How could I couldn't have left the others and come up to you alone. How could I? Don't look at me like that. Oh, well, I suppose I could. Yes, and I know it wouldn't have been alone. I know, not if I was with you. But what would have been the good? Does Aslan say it's her fault for not following him? He does.
Well, not really.
He doesn't say it, but that's what he's getting at. Okay? She's like, it wasn't my fault. The others wouldn't listen to me. And his question is, okay, but are you okay? His question is, okay, but why didn't you follow me? You saw me. You believed in me. Why did you not follow me? And she's blaming it on the others. Well, they wouldn't. They wouldn't go. He says, well, why didn't you come by yourself? And she's like, I don't know. Aslan said nothing. You mean, said Lucy rather faintly, that it would have turned out all right somehow? But how? Please, Aslan, am I not supposed to know? To know what would have happened, child? Said Aslan. No, nobody has ever told that. Oh dear, said Lucy. She says, listen, if I had followed you, you're telling me I would have been okay? It would have worked out, you would have protected me, and I would have been all right if I just followed you? And he says, to know what would have happened, no one's allowed to know that. He's like, you'll never know now. But anyone can find out what will happen, said Aslan. If you go back to the others now and wake them up and tell them that you have seen me again and that you must all get up at once and follow me, what will happen? There's only one way of finding out. Now, Aslan wants Lucy to go back to the other children and say, hey, I saw him again, let's go, we gotta follow him. If you were Lucy, what would your first thought be? Matthew?
Yes. Yes, I will.
Yes, I will. I would hope so. Connor, what do you think?
Go away. It's not trying to get up.
Yeah, it would not go very well. Jacob?
I'd be like, yeah, let's just forget about this.
Mm-hmm. Layla? Excellent. She said, to be honest, I'd say, why? They wouldn't believe me anyway. And that's exactly how Lucy feels. She said, I told them the first time they wouldn't come. If I go back and tell them again, they aren't going to listen now either. Do you mean that is what you want me to do? Gasped Lucy. Yes, little one, said Aslan. Well, will the others see you too? Asked Lucy. Certainly not at first, said Aslan. Later on, it depends. But they won't believe me, said Lucy. It doesn't matter, said Aslan. Oh dear, said Lucy. And I was so pleased at finding you again, and I thought you'd let me stay. And I thought you'd come roaring in and frighten all the enemies away, like last time. And now, everything is going to be horrid. It is hard for you, little one, said Aslan, but things never happen the same way twice. It has been hard for us all in Narnia before now. What does he say? She says, it's going to be so hard, and he says, sorry. It's going to be hard. It's going to be. But things never happen the same way twice. And I will strengthen you. This is one of my favorite parts in the whole book. Lucy buried her head in his mane to hide from his face. But there must have been some magic in his mane. She could feel lion strength going into her. Quite suddenly, she sat up. I'm sorry, Aslan, she said. I'm ready now. What made her ready now? Why was she scared before, but now she's ready? What happened to make her brave? Edgar?
Lion strength into it.
How did the lion strength go into her?
She put her head in his
She put her head in his mane. She hugged him. She spent time with him. And the more time she spent with him, the stronger she felt. She drew strength from being with him. Okay? This is a perfect allegory of the gospel and how the author wants this to be as if when Christians spend time with God, he strengthens them as well. Okay? Because God asks Christians to do hard stuff, right? Just like Aslan's asking Lucy to do hard stuff. He says, I don't care if nobody else believes you. You still have to go and tell them. Which is the same thing God says to believe to his Christians, his people. You've got to tell them about me. It doesn't matter if they don't believe in you. It doesn't matter if it's not hard. If it is hard, you still have to obey. Okay? So she says, I'm sorry, Aslan. I'm ready now. Now you are a lioness, said Aslan. And now all Narnia will be renewed. But come, we have no time to lose. He got up and walked with stately, noiseless paces back to the belt of dancing trees through which she had just come. And Lucy went with him, laying a rather tremulous hand on his mane. Why is her hand trembling? Connor?
He like so much power that he was.
That's a good idea. I think that maybe that's part of it, but I think there's another reason. You think of another reason why she might be trembling?
super excited.
She's excited, and she's about to have to do something hard. So she's maybe a little bit scared or nervous. Hold on. The trees parted to let him through. Can you imagine that?
Yes.
Why do the trees part? Well, he's in control of the trees. And they say, absolutely, Lord, we are letting you pass through. The trees parted to let them through, and for 1 second assumed their human forms completely. Lucy had a glimpse of tall and lovely wood gods and wood goddesses, all bowing to the lion. He's their ruler. The next moment they were trees again, but still bowing, with such graceful sweeps of branch and trunk that their bowing was itself a kind of dance. Now, child, said Aslan, when they had left the trees behind them, I will wait here. Go and wake the others and tell them to follow. If they will not, then you at least must follow me alone. It is a terrible thing to have to wake 4 people, kind of like how Connor feels when waking his brother. All of these people older than yourself and all very tired, for the purpose of telling them something they probably won't believe and making them do something they probably won't like. Okay, I mustn't think about it. I must just do it, thought Lucy. Now let's see how they all react to being woken up. They're tired, they're hungry, they're upset because they haven't gotten to Caspian's camp yet, they're frustrated, and she's waking them up in the middle of the night. She went to Peter first and shook him. Peter, she whispered in his ear. Wake up! Quick! Aslan is here. He says we've got to follow him at once. Certainly, Lou. Whatever you like, said Peter unexpectedly. This was encouraging, but as Peter instantly rolled around and went back to sleep again, it wasn't much use. He's like, yeah, sure, Lucy, okay, let's go. Falls back asleep.
Oh, he must have been asleep like
Yes. Then she tried Susan. Susan did really wake up, but only to say in her most annoying grown-up voice, You've been dreaming, Lucy. Go to sleep again. She tackled Edmund next. It was very difficult. I think it means she more moved on to tackling trying to wake up Edmund. A hard task. She tackled Edmund next. It was very difficult to wake him, But when at last she had done it, he really was awake and sat up. He said in a grumpy voice. What are you talking about? She said it all over again. This was one of the worst parts of her job, for each time she said it, it sounded less convincing. Aslan! Said Edmund, jumping up. Hooray! Where? Lucy turned back to where she could see the lion waiting, his patient eyes fixed upon her. There! She said, pointing. Where? Asked Edmund again. There! Right there! Don't you see? Just this side of the trees. Edmund stared hard for a while and then said, No, there's nothing there. You've got dazzled and muddled with the moonlight. One does, you know. I thought I saw something for a moment myself. It's only an optical, what do you call it?
Illusion.
But I can see him all the time, said Lucy. Why, he's looking straight at us. Then why can't I see him? Well, he said you might not be able to. Why? I don't know. That's just what he said. Oh, bother it all, said Edmund. I do wish you wouldn't keep on seeing things. But I suppose we'll have to wake the others.
Yay!
So, wait. Shh, this is important. Shh, this is important. Why can Edmund not see Aslan? Ian?
Well, you don't really figure this out until later, so...
Okay, well, hold on then.
I'll do it.
Why can he not see, or why do you think he cannot see Aslan? Courtney? Oh, Riley? Sorry.
Because he's kind of not believing.
Very good.
And, well, isn't the based on the
Mm-hmm.
So basically, Aslan is Julia,
Mm-hmm.
and Edmund Lucy, and all the aliens were the Parker,
Mm-hmm.
and Raymond kept showing him, so they were praising him.
Very good. He says, I thought I saw him for a second, but then again, it was probably just an optical illusion. So Edmund seems to be the most open, the most willing to believe in Aslan, right? Probably why he saw him just a little bit. Lucy is the only one that fully believes in him. And that's why she can see him and no one else can. Okay? Everyone else is doubting. They think they know a better way than following Aslan. They're kind of like, if he wanted us to come, he would have shown up. He would have shown us. But when Edmund gets up and says, you know what, we might should wake the others, that shows that Edmund, even though he can't see it, he still has the faith to take the steps to follow him. And we'll find out if he continues to follow him and eventually is able to see him. Okay? Oh, that's like my favorite chapter in the whole book. Love it. All right. Wyatt, go ahead. Aiden, question?
Are people still here so can I show it?
Yes.
Very tiny. Very tiny.
Hold on.
Wait, you did? I think so.
Riley?